Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Stephen Tobin. Stephen is a leading expert in labor market policy and research, and he's currently the CEO and founder of a company by the name of LabourX. It's a consulting firm dedicated to helping clients make sense of the world of work. Stephen's also worked on employment issues for federal and provincial levels of governments, as well as in a number of international organizations. Today, we're going to talk to Stephen about labor and skill shortages in a recent opinion piece that he published just this week on this topic that I found really quite interesting. Because what it really suggested, Stephen, was that you sort of got to use a recession as an opportunity to upgrade your skills, because you can't upgrade your skills when everyone's employed. And that you're almost suggesting that the government mismanaged the opportunities we had a couple of years ago, both in 2000 and maybe in 2009, 2020 and 2009. And given that you think there's a recession coming up, we got to plan for it and make sure that we do the right things. Is that the simplistic summary of what your argument was?
Well, I'm not sure how simple that is, but I think, yeah, that kind of hits the main points, is that, look, I've been maybe around long enough to have seen labor and skill shortages continuously resurface. After we have a bit of a downturn, things start to pick up again. And lo and behold, very quickly, almost instantaneously, it would seem, we become confronted with this labor and skill shortages. And then it becomes very urgent to kind of address, right? And, the point we try to make in the piece is that, at the time when it becomes most difficult to find people or to find people with the right skills, it becomes very costly. And these types of investments take an enormous amount of time. And so what we really kind of advocate for is a much more proactive approach to kind of the skills labor market issues. And yeah, to your point, most signs are pointing to a recession or at least a slowdown. Even June's jobs report showed a bit of a slowdown in employment growth. And this is really kind of the opportune time to kind of rethink our strategy about how we address some of these key issues, which are really affecting almost our daily lives this time around.
So you also pointed out, I think in the article, that even though we had low unemployment, there were a lot of people that were still looking for jobs. And you were suggesting, I think, that this is because we hadn't done sort of upgrading of skills the right way in the past. And every day I hear that people can't find people, companies can't find people. So if unemployment is low, isn't that great that everyone is just working and we actually logically have the right skills?
For sure. Look, low unemployment is a good thing, right? The fact that we have record numbers of people working and that we've sort of surpassed pre-pandemic job numbers is, of course, good news, right? The point now, though, is that businesses are screaming for people in various places, right? And so I think what's different this time around is, in the past, it would take place, but it would seem to the regular folks like myself that this was kind of a theoretical construct that was happening somewhere else. Oh, some business can't find somebody. Okay, should we really be that concerned? But it's really affecting our daily lives now, right? I mean, there are stories, you go to a restaurant, the menus are reduced, the number of seatings are reduced. Some of the troubles we've seen at the airports, at least, are part and parcel to the inability to find sort of people. It's affecting supply chains. And I think even more fundamentally, when we think about the bigger picture of trying to transition to low carbon economy, making big investments in infrastructure, if we're unable to kind of find that talent, then investment starts to recede, things start to slow down, and a recession almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will. And so I think that's brought to the fore the issue of labor and skill shortages in a way that's different than before. And I'm hopeful that we can kind of learn from those lessons of the past, and that if there is a bit of a slowdown, this is a perfect time to think about a national labor market and skills strategy.
So bottom line, start thinking now about what you're going to do with skills development during the recession, if it comes. And you're saying this is a national strategy. So this is a federal government responsibility, or is this provincial government, or is this companies, or what?
I think it's all of those. Certainly, federal, provincial, territorial governments have a role to play. Employers, of course. I think colleges, universities, training institutions have to kind of rethink how they deliver programming. And there's an important move away from, how we traditionally thought about a degree or a credential, what that means, and what's being asked of employers in the workplace. And of course, there's a role to play for individuals. And I think, kind of to your earlier point, there are still people out there who also are looking for a job but can't find one, right? Yes. So, and that gets lost a little bit in this conversation around employers' inability to find people. And it's a question of matching on different levels, right? I mean, you mentioned yourself that, okay, in some instances, there's lots of people applying, but they don't necessarily have the skill set, right? So that really kind of necessitates kind of a different approach. But then in other instances, there just aren't people applying. And that's happening for a number of reasons. And what's sort of masked behind these national numbers, right, is, the headline is always Canada, 4.9% unemployment rate. But we know that there are pockets of places and people who are looking for work, but they may not necessarily match either geographically to where the jobs might be, or they might not have the skill sets to take up those jobs that are on offer. Or even in some instances, there's been some, arguments around this great resignation that some people aren't interested necessarily in the jobs that are on offer, which is a completely separate problem altogether.
But I guess one of the other things that you're saying is that, in a tough economic time, governments are going to be spending money. And what you're saying is, rather than just spend money by sending it to people, spend it in smart ways by sending them back to school, or giving them training, or giving them certificate programs, upgrading their skills. So spending money wisely. Think ahead to spend money wisely. Anyway, we're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Stephen Tobin about his suggestions for what's wrong with our current skills strategy, what we need to do, and thinking about that in anticipation of potentially a slowdown or a coming recession. Interesting, something that I think a lot of us have to pay attention to if we're in companies. Certainly politicians need to pay attention to. And frankly, all of us should be paying attention to in case, we have a slowdown ourselves because we're laid off or something. Probably good to be helpful to be thinking about what we might want to do. We're going to be back in 2 minutes with Stephen Tobin. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Stephen Tobin. He is an expert in labor markets and work, and he's written an op-ed piece, a column, in the national publication that I read this week that was really quite provocative about us having to think ahead of time in regards to economic slowdowns or recessions, and thinking about upgrading skills and having a national skills strategy during that time. Stephen, you've got really quite a very impressive resume. Let me tell our listeners a little bit about you so they'll want to listen a little bit more. You've got a Bachelor of Business Administration from Acadia University. You got a certificate in French language from the University of Sorbonne in, I presume, Paris. You've got an honors diploma in economics from the McGill University. You've got a Master's of Arts in economics from the University of Victoria. And then, my gosh, your job history. You can't keep a job, can you? Like this, you're all over the place. This guy, it's really impressive. He was an economist with the OECD in Paris, France. Why would you leave Paris? Why would you leave Paris working for the OECD? And then he went to Ottawa. If you can imagine leaving Paris and going to Ottawa, he was a senior economist with the Chief of Labor Market Policy at the Employment and Social Development Canada, so he became a civil servant. Then he went to Saskatchewan. My God, you're really going downhill. Paris, then Ottawa, then Saskatchewan. Nothing wrong with Regina, but I just think Paris would be great. And in Saskatchewan, you're the Director of Labor Market Information for the government of Saskatchewan. Then you went to Geneva, so back across the ocean, to become a team leader and senior economist at the International Labor Organization in Geneva. That must have been fun. So Paris and Geneva. And then you became the Executive Director of Labor Market Information in Ottawa again. And then you became the Chief Executive Officer of LabourX. And it doesn't say where this is, but I presume it's in Ottawa as well. Is that correct?
I am still based in Ottawa, yes.
And you're also a research fellow at the C.D. Howe Institute, supporting the Institute's Human Capital Research Agenda. What a fascinating career. Paris, Ottawa, Saskatchewan, Geneva, Ottawa. There's got to be something that keeps bringing you back to Ottawa. Maybe if you want to run for prime minister or something like that, but or minister of HDRC or whatever it's called these days. I don't even know. So that's really quite the career. What led you down this career, and particularly this career that's so focused on labor and labor issues?
Well, I think one thing missing from my CV there is that I'm from Cape Breton. Born and raised and proud Cape Bretoner. And I would say that, growing up, work was fundamental to our daily livelihood, right? Whether or not my grandfather was going to be laid off at the coal mine or not, had an important impact. And so on a personal level, I was always intrigued by the importance of work, I think, from not only a financial kind of angle, because you need to put meat and potatoes on the table, right? But also it brings you a sense of social community purpose. And I think we kind of forget a little bit how important work is beyond kind of the benefits we get to sort of put that meal on the plate. And so I've always been kind of fascinated about the importance of employment. And yeah, I've worked in various places in kind of support of that endeavor of, helping people make the right employment choices.
What was it like working in Paris, France?
Paris was great. And at that time, interestingly, I was working, dating myself a little bit now, but it was, again, at the time, labor shortages. So we're talking, near the end of my time at OECD was 2005. So historically low unemployment rates again in Canada. And I was working on a project that looked at ways to promote workers 55 and over to kind of stay and maintain in the labor market as kind of a key issue, right? Like, this is a group big in numbers, sometimes exiting a little earlier than they themselves want to, are faced with a number of barriers to staying, be it cultural, be it sort of pension wise. And that kind of brought me back to Canada to say, okay, now that we have these ideas, what can we go about doing in order to implement some of those recommendations?
And then Geneva must have been kind of interesting. And Geneva is, just a gorgeous, gorgeous city, is it not?
Geneva is amazing. Yes. Geneva is where I discovered cycling. And so today, I don't know if you noticed, but a Canadian won the Tour de France today for the first time in quite a number of years.
I did notice that. Fantastic.
And in Ottawa cyclists came third, in fact. So yeah, Geneva was a special place and got to work on, a lot of issues outside of Canada, but again, more from an employment perspective. But yeah, it was a great time. And the most recent move back was, in all sincerity, mostly for love, but also found a great job. So.
Fantastic. Congratulations. A cousin of mine worked for your organization. I think she was in New York at the UN representing your organization, Jane Stewart. Did you ever run into Jane Stewart?
Jane, yes, through the ILO. Jane, was based in the New York office. And in fact, Jane and I had crossed career paths earlier on when she was also at, what is now ESDC, but was also HRSDC. So yeah, she was amazing.
I'll have to let her know that. So let's come back to this column. Why did you write it?
I wrote it because I think it's fallen off. It's on the radar of everyone you talk to, but seems to be not on the agenda of policymakers. And so in their defense, I would say that there's a lot of initiatives that are taking place. Certainly on the skills front, but a lot of it is uncoordinated. And I think, two main reasons. One, I think we do need this kind of national strategic approach to make sense of all the different initiatives that are happening. And I think importantly, the timing is critical, right? Like, as we mentioned at the beginning, if there is a recession coming around the corner, this is the perfect opportunity to think about when people are laid off or unemployed, it's the opportune time to think about retraining and how we might upskill or reskill them for the jobs that will eventually come following a recession. And so I think it's critical to think about the timing.
We live in a capitalist economy, and we've had a whole bunch of people in Ottawa yelling freedom at the top of their lungs for a little while. Why doesn't this happen naturally? Why do you think you have to have a national skills, plan, strategy? Why doesn't it just happen naturally? Why don't people take, what the market's demanding? Isn't that what people would logically do? If they think that investment banking is under demand, they're going to go to business degrees. If they think that plumbing is under demand, they're going to take plumbing apprentice courses. Why doesn't it happen naturally? Why does government need to intervene?
Sure. I think from my economist perspective is that government needs to intervene under a number of conditions, right? And one of the first ones is that there is asymmetric information, which technically means, or more practically means, not everyone has the same information, right? So employers are thinking about credentials and qualifications, maybe not able to articulate clearly what they need from an employee. An employee is out there, my cousin is in Cape Breton. How does he know what the skills in demand are, right? He might not know investment banking is a big thing, or he certainly might not have the qualifications necessarily to do that. If there is a job in Toronto, does he know how much it's going to cost to live in Toronto for a 2-bedroom? How might he get that information? And same with the training institutions, right? So how do they bring together what employers are asking for on the one hand and what individuals have to offer on the other? And so for me, the basic fundamental reason as to why governments need to intervene in this case is we're not all sharing the same information, and there's a role to play in coordinating all these different entities that I've just mentioned in a way that ensures, okay, what are the skills going to be demanded in the next 3, 5, 10 years? What sort of training provision is currently being provided? What does our population look like? And how can we bring those together to ensure that people find quality employment and that businesses can get the talent that they need to grow and invest? And so that's why I think in this particular case, because of this information missing component, government has a clear role to play, especially on the coordination side.
How does government get the information? Do you just do a survey, do a poll? How do you get the information?
There's different ways. Certainly, there's a lot of information out there in terms of, new techniques like machine learning that looks at job postings and is able to sort of extract sort of insights from what the job postings are asking for. Another way, of course, is through surveys, like asking employers about the types of people that they're looking for and where. And then thinking again more critically about the training side and, okay, what and how are training institutions providing the skills that people need? And so there's different ways to get at that information, and some of it exists. And I think part of a national strategy would certainly look into how you'd go about gathering and sharing that information with all the players that have a role in the ecosystem.
So what's the impact of us not doing this in the past?
The impact is we reach a situation where we are now is that, we mentioned at the beginning this kind of self-fulfilling recession prophecy, which is, okay, when businesses suddenly can't find the people or the people with the right skills, they stop investing. So, imagine someone who wants to expand, right? They want to open another new business. They see the demand is there. They want to buy a new building or refurbish a new restaurant and expand, but they can't find the people to do that. And so they don't make those investments. And then eventually that's not made. And then they decide to downsize and they start to fire people. And this, of course, when people don't have work, they don't spend, they don't go out. So businesses make less money and and so it has this kind of vicious cycle where it becomes self-fulfilling.
And so your proposal would be, we have this strategy, and if there's identified skilled need in a certain area, we do what? We force people to take certification programs in that needed area. What do we do?
Well, we certainly don't, I think really don't force people to, become doctors. For instance, of course, right, what's happening now in Prince Edward Island and other places where they've, here in Ontario and Perth, they've had to close the emergency room for inability to sort of staff emergency rooms, same in Victoria. So no, we certainly don't want to force people into certain occupations, but we certainly want to provide the opportunities and information to people to show them where the opportunities are, and the training and education to allow them to choose their career path. And I think here, career guidance plays an important role. But I would say, like, to your earlier point about governments and handing out money during the pandemic, it's a very important thing for individuals and households to have income support during times like we had during the pandemic. But, what we would argue more for is let's combine that with other measures. So let's provide income support, yes, but let's also provide them with training support and other measures that would allow them to kind of change their skill set and aptitudes to explore other careers, which they will want to do when things start to return to normal and firms start to hire and people will be looking for opportunities, and making sure that they have the right skill set and desire to take up those jobs, I think, will be really important. And that's why the check is important, but there are other things we can be doing alongside that.
So I come back to this argument that I gave you a little while ago, is that why isn't this happening anyway? Like, wages go up, salaries go up if you can't find employees, and different occupations are in demand. And if that happens, that quickly gets known by people in the marketplace. And you say that you get the information by taking a look at what job postings are. People can take a look on LinkedIn or Indeed, and they can see what the job postings are, where the job opportunities are. So why is that in our capitalist economy, where people don't want government to tell us what to do, that this doesn't happen automatically, normally?
First, wages are going up in certain occupations, maybe not quite yet to the extent that we see prices rising, but that's normal to have a little bit of a lag between the two. The other thing I would say too is wages can only rise to a certain competitive point, right? Where a business suddenly is no longer able to make a living from what they're doing, right? So wages can grow, yes, but only to a certain point. The other thing I would say is, coming back to there's often a skills and geographic mismatch. So for instance, the job might be on offer, but the person who's interested in that job might be 1,000 kilometers away. And so what is it that we can do to sort of help that individual transition? Or in some cases, there are a number of applicants, but we don't necessarily have the skill set, right? So, when I think about anecdotally during the pandemic, there were these stories of, former restaurant workers becoming coders, IT coders, right? And so certainly there were some examples of that, but the reality is in many sectors especially where there's higher skill sets required, we're not able to find the people with the right skill sets. And so that's why it's important to think about the reskilling and not necessarily just purely wages as a market solution.
We're chatting tonight with Stephen Tobin. He is a leading expert in labor market policy and research, and he's currently the CEO and founder of LabourX, a consulting firm dedicated to helping clients make sense of the world of work. Stephen also worked on employment issues for federal and provincial levels of government, as well as a number of international organizations, as I mentioned, in Paris and in Geneva and in Saskatchewan. Well, that's not international, but still a fun place to go. We're going to talk a little bit more with Stephen about labor market inefficiencies and skill shortages and ways that we need to adjust and think about things in the future if we're going to all have those jobs that we all want to have. After about 2 minutes of messages that are obviously messages of people that want to take your money and employ people. So listen to these messages and we'll be back with Stephen in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm speaking tonight with Stephen Tobin. He wrote a really interesting piece in the Globe and Mail at least I read in the Globe and Mail, it was probably published elsewhere as well, this past week, about labor market policy and some skill shortages that we need to take really advantage of and solve in recessionary time periods or slowdowns. It was really quite an interesting piece that suggested that you got to use recessions as an opportunity, as a place and a time that you're going to have people available. Government's going to be spending money anyway, and so therefore spend it in the right ways by upgrading people's skills. And I thought it sounded great. You're now a CEO of a LabourX, a consulting firm. If people go to your website, can they see the column posted on that website by any chance?
No, not yet, but it's available on the CD Howe Institute's website.
CD Howe Institute. And if people want to follow you, what's the best way? Is it Twitter, or is it your website, or how, if people want to follow your writings and your thinking, what's the best way to follow you?
Yeah, I think the best would be to go to LabourX.ca, and from there you can find different avenues to kind of keep me abreast of, or keep yourself abreast of what's happening in terms of some of my other work.
Awesome.
So LabourX.ca would be the best. Let
me ask you another couple of questions, if I could. We're talking about the labor market and challenges with the labor market. Immigration is obviously an issue, and some people think 430,000 people, which is what I think the Liberal government has announced as the target amount of immigration for Canada, is an astronomically high number. And other people say, no, frankly, it's not enough. And we're all aging, and we're going to end up having a slimming down, reduction in the workforce. And there's going to be not nearly as many people working, supporting those seniors. And someone actually described it as, right now, there's 4 people working for every 1 person that they're supporting in seniorhood and educational time periods. And in the future, it's going to be 2 to 1. So it's going to go down dramatically. And so therefore, we need immigration as a way to stopgap that. What do you think about immigration? How do you think, as a labor market expert, about immigration, both from a skills standpoint, but also from just a pure workforce standpoint?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head, really, is that, our population has been aging for decades now. So this should come as no surprise to anyone. And, like low unemployment rates, population aging is a good thing, right? We're living longer, healthier lives. Great. But it does, as you point out, is leading already to slowdowns in the growth of our workforce, right? Especially in Atlantic Canada. Newfoundland in particular already is starting to slow. And so how do we sort of address some of the downsides of population aging? And I think you articulated it really better than I could. One is workforce and one is skills, right? So on the workforce side, look, 400,000, 200,000, 600,000, I'm not sure. But the answer is we definitely need immigration, right? Now, the right number, at what time, I would leave other experts to figure that out. But the answer is clear, yes, we need immigration to sort of support our workforce development. More importantly, though, I think, is that second stream that you mentioned, which is skills. And this is something less talked about. So instead of talking about 250 or 450 or 650, I would rather the conversation be about, what does the composition look like, right? And what are the types of skill sets that we need, and where, right? Because we talked a lot about some of the geographic mismatch that's happening kind of internally in Canada. And so for me, the big questions around immigration are not yes or no. It's a definitely yes, but more, let's have an intelligent conversation about the skills composition. Where are they most needed in terms of the sectors, and also geographically, to address what I would say are sort of really structural issues of attracting talent. And so that's where the conversation needs to go. And here I would say the immigration system needs to change, right? In the sense of, up until now, it's very much focused on credentials and qualifications, right? So do you have a degree? I mean, there's some screening with respect to essential skills, but the language of skills, right, being separate from whether or not you have a degree, needs to now be part of how we think about that composition for immigration. And that's not happened yet. And that's where I think much of the work needs to be done.
So it sounds like you almost think that Immigration Canada, or at least the embassies abroad that are accepting people applying for visas or citizenship or immigration or whatnot, almost needs to be like LinkedIn, that they need to have job applications. And as I've talked to a lot of people that are new immigrants, there are a lot of people that are very well qualified that truly are, driving taxis, driving Ubers today, and even after many years in Canada, can't find jobs because too many Canadian employers only value Canadian experience, not international degrees or international experience. So isn't it not just that we've got to find the right skills, but frankly, we should almost be finding people jobs, and before they come, they know where they're going to be working.
Well, I mean, I think, we need to be thinking longer term, right? Of course, it's important to find people a job immediately, and certainly helps with integration into society. But, I would think we'd want to be a little bit more strategic in terms of thinking about the skill sets and the foundational skills that we will need for the coming decades, right? And how we might embed some of that into our screening. But you raise another important point: is what does Canadian experience mean? I don't know, right? And I've certainly heard the same thing from my friends.
I'd rather have the Paris and Geneva experience than you had. My God,
right?
I'm not sure about the Saskatchewan.
Listen, 2 winters in Saskatchewan was some of the best times I've ever had. But I have a good friend from Germany. He's an economist. Came here a few years ago. By all metrics, looks and sounds and talks very much like me, but was confronted with some of the same barriers that you mentioned. It's like, he doesn't have any Canadian experience, doesn't understand provinces and territories, right? And I think that is where the problem lies, is that we think, what's being looked at from an employer perspective, and this is kind of where some of the misinformation is like, they'll write the job description that says must have knowledge of provinces and territories. That's not a skill, right? The German person in question might have tremendous knowledge on how federations work in Germany. And that's a skill that he could apply to the Canadian context. And so that's something that's, I think, where the government can play a role again in this kind of misinformation of what exactly is needed to succeed. And it's not Canadian experience per se.
Let me ask you a different question. Bill Morneau, the former Minister of Finance, came out with a major speech a couple of weeks ago saying the problem is lack of productivity and a lack of focus on prosperity. Frankly, it sounds like Roger Martin and the Institute for Competitiveness and Prosperity that Rotman and U of T had, I think, a decade ago. And this has been a issue in Canada for generations, that for some reason we seem to have far lower productivity than the United States, our major competitors. Number one, do you agree with that? And number two, if true, why and what can we do about
it? Definitely. We've had a productivity problem for decades now. And I think, there's a number, I think, of underlying considerations as to why that is. But, lack of innovation hubs like the higher skill sets. But, from a workforce perspective, I think one issue that we've been talking a little bit about today, of course, is the inability to find skilled talent, right? So if I'm unable to hire someone with the right skills, or I'm unable to provide that individual with the right upskilling or reskilling needed for the jobs that then lead to investments, that then lead to more consumption investment jobs, then to me, this is one of the key kind of barriers confronting increased productivity is our inability to upskill and reskill. And so, yes, I think if we want to solve the productivity puzzle, that's certainly one thing we need to be thinking about. And of course, there are others in terms of how we think about entrepreneurship and innovation, but thinking about workforce issues, the upskilling and reskilling is a key ingredient for me, because it touches upon all of these other issues, right? If you don't have the right talent, there's a risk that investment declines, or, in some instances we haven't quite seen this yet, is then you go to automation, right? Which is a different type of investment. So look, if I can't find somebody, then I'm going to have the portable thing, right? Instead of actually someone working at the cash. But I don't know about you, but every time I go to McDonald's, the last thing I want to do is use that automatic kiosk. I just want to go to the counter and order my stuff. But okay, they've been kind of forced to do that in the spirit of their inability to find people. Now that's a good example of a productivity sector, but just something to think about in terms of risks that, in order to boost productivity, the upskilling and reskilling is a key issue to consider.
I read this one report that said one of the challenges in Canada is that we're less mobile, that either because we have too high home ownership, but not as many people renting, and people that rent are more mobile, or even the argument that we're concentrated in too many big cities, and so therefore people aren't as flexible as going between Dallas and Houston or Florida or New York or whatnot. Once people are in Toronto, they want to stay in Toronto or Ottawa or Calgary or Edmonton or Vancouver, and they just don't move a lot. And that we have a inflexible labor market and it doesn't move around. Is that a problem, do you think?
I personally think it's a big problem. I mean, look, certainly we have a pretty big country, right? So obviously, mobility is going to be much more challenging than it is in a small country like Switzerland, of course, right? Which also has infrastructure, which allows people to move from different cities. But one issue I think that we're not talking about, leaving the size of our country aside for a moment, is home ownership, right? So you're looking at and talking to, I'm a renter, been a renter all my life, which has enabled me, in fact, to move to different places and to seize new opportunities. And okay, that's a personal philosophy as well. And I don't have anything against home ownership, but the question is, should governments be subsidizing home ownership? And if so, for whom? And what are the potential negative effects of that subsidization, right? And that, I think, is something that we're not talking about. And this is something that's been around a long time because, when I think about, from my hometown and also in Newfoundland, the cod industry failed. And then, we suddenly miraculously thought we could get all these older Newfies and Cape Bretoners to suddenly move to Toronto and take up manufacturing jobs. I mean, it was completely absurd. Their entire savings were in their home, and that was where they wanted to be and were going to be, right? So I do think it is an issue. How to resolve it is, I think, a bigger question. But for me, it's more, we should not necessarily be subsidizing home ownership for everyone. So I think we need to be thinking about where we're encouraging home ownership and why.
So you're suggesting what? Eliminate the principal residence tax deduction?
I don't know if I would go that far, but
Joe Clark at one point in time actually did the reverse. He suggested that we have mortgage interest deductibility like the United States.
Yeah, I mean, also, in Switzerland, it's 20% ownership, 80% rent, and there's lots of infrastructure around supporting the rentals. But okay, that's a different cultural angle. And not every job can be done working from home, right? So you and I, at least as far as I can tell, are both working from home, so we can be mobile and be wherever we want to be and likely be there. But a lot of the jobs that we're talking about in terms of labor and skill shortage, so a lot of skilled trades, you can't build a new building working from home. So how is it we go about encouraging the mobility of people and not disincentivizing mobility through home ownership? It's a tough question, and I think it's one that a conversation we should be having.
We're chatting tonight with Stephen Tobin. He's a leading expert in labor market policy and research. He's currently the CEO and founder of LabourX. a consulting firm dedicated to helping clients make sense of the world of work. We're going to take a final break for some quick messages, come back more with some final two questions that I want to ask Stephen. I want to ask him about, are we all going to be replaced by robots in the future? And what about minimum wage? Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm with you every night at 6 o'clock, Monday through Friday, bringing you hopefully interesting conversations with some fascinating people in the politics, economics, business, lifestyle, arts, etc. area. And tonight's guest is Stephen Tobin. He is a leading expert in labor market policy and research. He's the CEO and founder of LabourX, a consulting firm. He's worked with the OECD in Paris. He's worked with Labor International in Geneva. He's worked with the Canadian government in Ottawa. This man has seen the world, and he's been educated here in Canada. He's been educated in Paris, and it's really quite impressive, his background. Stephen, I went to a seminar a year or two ago, and they said that truck drivers were all going to be replaced by autonomous truckers, trucks, and and the statistic of how many truck drivers there were in Canada, United States, was like pretty outrageous. And then they said, the one of the challenges is that a lot of the first and second and third year accounting and legal work is going to be done offshore or by AI. And that the problem is that, you get rid of the people that are doing their first couple of jobs. They're not going to get the experience that they can do the more senior jobs that have to be done by people, can't be done by people offshore and or by robots. With globalization, with AI and technology, what's the future of work? And does it worry you at all?
I'm an optimist, so I'm not worried. But nevertheless, I still think we need to be having some tough conversations around what policies and programs are needed to make that better future, right? The robots are coming, right? Like, the first thing I would say is people have been losing their job to technology for centuries. But the big question is what we've been talking about for the last hour is, how can we support people with income and upskilling and reskilling to take other opportunities, right? So the autonomous vehicle needs to be produced somewhere by someone that would require skills. And that has
autonomous robots? The autonomous vehicle is not going to be assembled by autonomous robots?
Right. So some of that will happen, but inevitably someone has to produce it, and there will be other opportunities for upskilling and reskilling. The other thing I would say is take it to its extreme, right? If the whole world is autonomous, so to your point about, the robots are the ones making the autonomous truck driving vehicles. What are these vehicles doing? They're delivering goods to whom? And who is purchasing them if no one is working or making money? It cannot exist. I don't know what they're producing if no one's working, because I'm not buying anything if I'm not working. So something has to give, right? If you take it to its extreme. And look, most of the evidence so far, I mean, leaving aside those kind of two issues, most of the evidence so far suggests that people need the skills to be working alongside robots, but to be determined. But I still remain quite optimistic, mostly because I can't imagine a world where we're producing something where there's no one who can buy it.
Okay, I've got a labor economist. I got to ask him the typical labor economics question. Minimum wage. In the last provincial election in Ontario, people were shocked when a Conservative, Doug Ford, actually agreed to increase the minimum wage. People thought Conservatives were always against minimum wage increases. Are minimum wages something that are helpful or harmful to the economy?
Well, there's two different things. One is minimum, the existence of a minimum wage, and then the other is how you increase minimum wage, right? And I think the existence of a minimum wage, of course, sets a floor for which we can value work. It's extremely important. Where it becomes contentious is how we manage the increases, which by and large in Canada have been ad hoc, sporadic, and not very much based on the science, right? So what you would hope from minimum wage increases is that they are based on objective criteria, some sort of form of cost of living or other factors, right? And that they are transparent and known ahead of time, rather than, ta-da, wages are going up tomorrow, right? So to answer your question, minimum wage serves a clear role in society, but I think we need to be doing a much better job around how we manage the increases in minimum wage, and that they're objective, transparent, and that employers can foresee them with some kind of clarity for workforce planning.
Stephen Tobin, thank you so much for joining us tonight and telling us a little bit about some of the issues associated with our labor market, particularly as it relates to skills upgrading and training in a economic slowdown. And with unemployment as high as low as it is right now, employment as high as it is, I guess it's a little bit weird to think about what we're going to do if we're out of work, or what we're going to do if a lot of people are out of work in a recession. But lots of economists, lots of people are predicting that we're headed for a slowdown, if not a recession, in the near future. And so I guess this is the right time to think about it. And I thank you for raising it in the column that you wrote this past week, and thank you for talking about it today. And I guess if I could just voice my own opinion, I think that one of the things in life that is important is to think about what you do in tough times and what you do when you've got some time. One of my favorite book, I think it was Taipan by James Clavell, who the main character said that you have to have F-off money, so that in tough times you've got some money to be able to say to people you don't like, whatever it is that you want to do, if you want to change jobs or if you want to move or something like that. I think that companies that go into a little bit more cash right now, so that they can have that cash available in a tough economic time, are helpful. I think the people that are thinking now about productivity increases or cutting costs or things they want to do will be better off. I did a show with John Rufola earlier in this week about what entrepreneurs got to think about in a recession. And so I think that it's really helpful that Stephen has helped us today thinking about what governments need to be thinking about in anticipation of a potential slowdown. And I also agree with the argument they made, is that, if you have a slowdown, whether it be a pandemic related slowdown or a subprime mortgage crisis slowdown, thinking about ahead of time what it is you're going to do, because just spending the money on building gazebos in Parry Sound or wherever it was that we built those gazebos, Tony Clement, I think it's really helpful to spend the money on smarter things like skills upgrading. And so Stephen Tobin, thank you so much for educating us on that. Really appreciate it. Come on back when you've written another piece.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian.
That's our show for tonight. I remind you, I'm on Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online from Ottawa, Paris, Geneva, or Switzerland, or Cape Breton at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody. Have a great evening.